I'm with John Jekovich, veteran of World War II, and we're going over his book called Their Mother's Son. It's 5/12/2024, Mother's Day, approximately 7 p.m. Mr. Jekovich, what is your serial dog tag number?
3020975.
We're on page 417, chapter 13 of his 900-page book, and it is picking up the last couple pages of chapter 14, and it's Catacombs Au Revoir. I thought of Anne and Jean. I thought of Anne and Jean, but somehow I could not reconcile. Are they talking about the pool table? Are you sure? Are you sure?
I don't know.
I thought of Anne and Jean, and somehow could not reconcile their presence in my mind as so amply regarding Renee. The hesitation and vacillation I felt regarding Anne were much clearer and more defined now as I look back at the months later. Although I still felt I loved Anne, it was much more insight in my true feelings that I was able to come into accord with my emotions regarding it. I knew now that I could never make a life with Anne. There was too much separating us, her family, her schooling, and ultimately her career. Also her social standing, which was far superior to mine, and her temperament or disposition characterized by her passion and drive to succeed. She was career-oriented, and it showered through every fiber of her being. One way or another, her career was a real romance here. Success and career were far deeper passions for her. The lust for success took precedence over romance and love. I would only deter her from the goal and consequently create a rift between us. The situation was found ourselves in. We met was transient and staged. It was wartime. Most of the young single men were off to war, and we were both caught up in the euphoria of the times. I dare say I returned to Owensboro after the war and took Anne home with me, and the reality of it all would permeate quickly. The illusion would be shattered, and we would be left only the stark of substance of it. Jean and Renee presented a much more difficult evaluation for my true inclination. Assuming I wanted to travel the marriage route, which at that time I did not, both were meant to achieve greater accomplishments than just a wife and a mother to someone. How would I frustrate and develop created a great sense of responsibility on my part. I would never do anything to contrive or reverse the penchant for greatness on their part. Renee and I are almost positive would achieve her aspiration, as was not too much standing in her way, assuring she has survived the rest of the war. Jean and I doubted she was not self-centered as Anne could be. There was many things that could sidetrack her. Her devotion and her parents was a dominant factor, and one which I admire very much. The financial standing of the parents was a contributing consideration, and one which would loom ever large as time went on. The overriding triage was her detachment of self, which was always uppermost in her thoughts. While an admirable trait, it would create havoc with you. I could attest to some of that. It seemed everyone came first at the expense of my own individual self. It was a trap I found myself entangled with many times and would later denounce only to revert to it the next time. What would I do after the war, assuming I survived it? In all probability, return home with much reservation and pick up where I left off, much wiser, but still compelled by outside forces to think of everyone else instead of myself. Renee was correct in her evaluation of me. When Renee opened the door on our last day together, I was enraptured by what I saw. She looked stunning, but even more radiant, glowing face ignited a spirit deep within me. I stepped back and admired her. All the while she kept smiling and reveling in excitement and displaying regarding her appearance. She would pause, and I enjoyed it greatly. She had put up her hair, which gave her an air of sophistication. Her short, tight, dark skirt displayed her firm and beautiful legs, which were enhanced by high heels she was wearing. The white blouse accented her. The fragrance she emitted was beautiful. "You're beautiful," I cited, still absorbed by the elegance and radiance. She smiled and led me into the parlor, where she had several glasses set on the tray on the table. She poured the champagne as she had handed me a glass. She looked into my eyes. I knew this was a special occasion. She had held up her glass and clinked the glasses and exchanged glances. She explained she had made reservations for lunch, and afterward we would go dancing and listening to some music. I looked at her, and all I could think of was I missed another golden opportunity. I said, "Great, I'll go anywhere with you," and took her hand and kissed it. Her nails were painted a bright red, and I held them as she related that she would like the color. I retorted that they looked sexy and I liked them. She smiled in her appealing fashion and moved closer to me, crossing her legs. As she did, her short skirt rose. She only smiled, finger in a glass, and said, "What am I?" "You're doing a good job," I remarked, wanting to hold her and kiss her. She got up and poured me more champagne in her glass, and then stood there, in the sunlight streaming through the window behind her. She was beautiful, and I was dismayed and perplexed at what she had chosen for her life's work. It seemed such a misappropriation of a natural endowment and talent. She returned to the couch and sat next to me, her fragrance waving its hypnotic spell over me until it overpowered me. I gently pushed her down on the couch. Do you want to continue? Do you?" she stammered, holding me slightly. I released her arms and neck upright on the couch. "Would you jeopardize your whole life meetings, your vow and your chastity and celibacy for me?" All of a sudden I realized that she did not belong to me, no matter how much I wanted to be with her. It was an invisible gate that had come down between us, separating us forever. We would never realize the fruits of each other's love for one another beyond tonight. My world had shattered once again. I did not know why I felt at this precise moment. I knew we had come full circle from the first time we met at the lake in the park. I thought then she was special. Now I knew for certain that she was. She jumped up. "We must go. I'll be only a moment," she explained, running into the back room. I sat there looking around the room. I would never forget it. Its monastic bluntness reflecting what was always meant to be. I felt it at the first moment I entered the sacred portals. There would be where the battle of Renee's soul would be fought. Like so many other battles I had fought and lost, I was destined to lose this one also. There were no pains or remorse in forsaking what I desired. There was only a beautiful outpouring within me which aided in my overcoming which would follow. We reached the restaurant by taxi, and Renee had recovered completely, looking beautiful and radiant. I too understand the significance of the next several hours and enjoyed her exhilaration and high spirits. The restaurant was the Ches Tout Oin, a short distance downtown from St. Michel's. The maitre d' confirmed our reservations, and we were escorted to our table into one of the nooks scattered about the dining room. I liked it as I was outside from the large dining room area, which afforded us some privacy. The decor was striking, with large crystal chandeliers hanging from the high cathedral-like ceilings, with large oaken beams running the width of the room. There were large mirrored walls throughout the huge flowered urns, proliferated everywhere on the marble floor. In one corner, elevated slightly from the floor, was a large black baby grand piano, silent now. Okay, that's the end of chapter 14, and now we move on to chapter 15, page 421, and the title of chapter 15 is Patrols on the Rhine, V.E. Day. The music was emanating from the string quartet, playing softly situated a short distance from where we were seated. Waiters in black jackets and white aprons were scurrying about. One came to our table and greeted us cheerfully. Renee began to order, speaking in French. As I listened to her, I remembered I would never again be afforded the pleasure of watching her as she spoke in her native tongue. For the next hour or so, we dined on gizzard salad. How was gizzard salad? Did you like gizzard salad?
What is it?
Gizzard salad. Did you like gizzard salad?
Dishes and salad?
Gizzard salad.
Desert?
Gizzard with a G. Gizzard salad. Gizzard. Gizzard salad. Did you remember gizzard salad?
No.
Okay. Also, you had salmon with herbs, snails. Did you like the snails?
No?
Did you like the snails?
No, salad was alright, yeah.
And a calf's head in a sauce, grilled lamb, and finally avocado mousse. It was avocado mousse. It was a wonderful, despite the fact I didn't know what I was eating most of the time. Okay, so it was like on a smorgasbord on a big plate, and you weren't really sure what the heck you were eating, right?
Yeah.
Okay. On our second carafe of wine, Renee began to talk about her time at the Resistance and how it helped her through a difficult period. I listened, enjoying watching her as she groped for an English word and would express her experience more vividly. I would miss all of this. I knew as I tried to concentrate on what she was saying rather than conjure about tomorrow. I listened to her. I considered myself extremely fortunate to have known her, even for a short time we had together. Whatever the future held for either of us, we tasted some of the exhilarating moments together, and the memories of them would be with us forever.
Huh.
Suddenly, she touched my hand as she was seeking my attention. She smiled, and I could see the sadness in her beautiful eyes. "Come, we must go," she barely murmured. We both knew our time together was rapidly coming to an end. There was nothing we could do to prolong our stay with one another. It was coming to its final conclusion. She wanted to pay the bill, but I would not have none of that. After trying to persuade me differently, she left to freshen up. She returned with a smile, as she had steeled herself and inevitable in a few short hours. She looked cherubic, and I wondered how she was going to exist, how I was going to exist without her. I loved her dearly and did not want to give her up. We walked around the St. Andres de Arts at the southwest corner of Place Street in St. Michel's until we came to a little place called Bellagio. It was crowded with GIs and French civilians, all having a good time, enjoying one another's company. The small band was playing nostalgic music of the 40s, and a circular dance floor was teeming with couples having a night out away from the war. For a brief period, like Renee and me, we were here to forget for a while the fleeting time and its consequences. What lay ahead for me in the distant future would be dealt with at an appropriate time. Now they would enjoy themselves no matter what. We found a table and ordered some wine. Renee was radiant, and I could see that she enjoyed the music. "Come," she insisted, taking my hand, leading me to the crowded dance floor. As we held each other, we became entranced with music. I kissed her on her cheek, and when I looked at her, I could see her eyes were misty. She would smile graciously and turn away, trying to hide the tears that were welling up in her. I wanted to dance with her forever, and the night to never end. We would occasionally go to our table, sip our wine, and then return to the dance floor. She had gotten quite quiet and reflective, knowing full well that our time together had come to the end. I held her for a while, we danced, and she whispered, and she did not want me to go, and she would miss me terribly. I pressed her closely, kissing her cheek. We talked of many times we had each other, letting the music set our mood. The dance floor had cleared out significantly, and it was getting late, and we knew we would have to leave also. She had to put her head on my shoulder and had not spoken for several minutes, just flowing with the music and her inner thoughts. We danced for a while and then left, deciding to walk the distance back to her house. I held her around the waist as we walked, with tension exhilarating, as realized our time of departure had arrived. She held my hand tightly, and I knew she was desperately trying not to cry. As we came to a small stone chapel, Renee asked for my handkerchief and affixed it to the top of her head, and we entered the chapel. She walked directly to the small altar rail, her high heels clicking on the stone floor. I knelt beside her as she bowed her head, her folded hands meeting on her forehead. After a moment, she took my hand and held it tightly. She began speaking softly in French, and I knew immediately that she was saying some type of prayer. Her voice was firm and sincere, and even though I did not understand the words, the conviction and the reverence vibrated in the holy sanctuary as she spoke. She became silent once more and touched my forehead with her folded hands. She looked saintly as she knelt there deep in prayer, and I knew she had discovered her true place in life. She rose, genuflected, and crossed herself toward me and kissed me softly on the cheek. She took my hand as we walked into the darkness of the night. It had turned colder, and a shiver went throughout my body, not so much from the cold, but from the realization that I would never see her again. As we walked, I was asked her what she was saying inside the chapel as she knelt in the altar rail. She was silent for a moment, and then taking my arm and holding it, she whispered softly, I was asking God to watch over you and protect you and bring you home safely. I said that you were special and I was always holding a loving place in my heart for you. Then she said something strange. I also thanked him for sending you to me in time of despair and discomfort. You helped me decide my destiny and put my life back together. I was moved by her disclosure, and it only made it more difficult to depart from her. There were tears in her eyes, and she held on to me, and I could feel her trembling and slowly walking, trying to prolong our departure as long as she could. I did not want to end it, but I was helpless to do anything about it. I did not make her a promise that we could come to a decision soon and linger too long in deciding. She promised that she would, and I felt that she had already decided to go back. I was relieved and happy for her. As we reached her house, I said that I should say goodbye to her here. I took her arm and kissed her repeatedly. Her cheeks were wet as she pressed them close to mine. I murmured that she would be just fine once she got settled into her new place. I told her that I loved her and would think of her often. She held me tightly and kept repeating, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I put my finger to her lips and she began sobbing quietly. I'll remember you always, she sobbed, clutching my hand and burying her head into my chest. She kissed me and uttered, God bless you and keep you, turned and quickly ran in the house. I stood there for a moment, soaking in every detail so I might remember the aspect of our departure. It took me extremely a long period of time to lessen the pain and the distress that I felt that night. I always left with a treasured memory of Renee and how much she meant to me. Wherever she might be, it was sure that at times she would look back at our time with fondness and with loving memory. We were so much similar, yet so much different. God bless you, Renee. Au revoir. I read the Stars and Stripes while at the hospital for news of the front and my information regarding my division. There was very little to tell of the particular division, but it was full of Allied push. They were pursuing a vigorous offensive, and they retook Woodsfield, Creancourt, Rochenrath, Walshershad, and eventually them to the vital Ruhr River dams and subsequently to the Rhine River. The next morning at 4:30 hours, the remaining patients at the hospital were transported to the third replacement depot. How were you transported to the third replacement depot?
Trucks.
Trucks, 6x6s?
Yeah.
Here were issued warm clothing, a sheltered half, wool blanket, mess equipment, and artillery weapons. As I was a squad leader, I was issued an M1 and given the opportunity to zero it out a small firing range provided. I fired about 30 rounds, and I felt strange firing a weapon once again. Lying on the semi-frozen ground with only a shelter half beneath. Firing the M1 brought me back to reality and what I lay ahead of me. I was more upset and distressed at leaving Renee. It gradually overcame me further when I went from Paris. The full impact of not seeing her again did not fully register with me until the next morning when I was wakened at the start of our journey back in our respective units. I went through the usual ritual of shaving, getting dressed, but I was not fully aware of what I was doing. All I could think about was Renee, and just before she turned around and ran into the house. I knew that I missed her terribly, and that she left a large empty void in my life, which I would not see replaced for some time. Later that afternoon, we grouped off into sections from our respective locations of our units and loaded into 40 and 8s. We rode the cattle cars all that night. What are the cattle cars? Cattle cars. What are the cattle cars?
Saddle cars.
Cattle cars. Are those trucks or trains? Cattle cars.
Cattle cars are trains.
Okay. We rode the cattle cars all that day and night when we arrived in Belgium at mid-morning of the next day. The only thing different was the 40 and 8 ride as compared to the others I've been on. This one was not as crowded and we made frequent stops. It was a startling change from what I became accustomed to at the hospital. It was snowing as we crossed the border into Belgium, but the replacement depot at Verrières was heated. After a hot meal, we were billeted in a large room which looked like once a gym of some kind. My only recollection of the replacement depot at our overnight stay was the sounds of planes flying overhead. As I lay on the wooden floor under my blanket, I could make out a familiar drone of British Spitfires flying overhead on their way to Germany or returning from a fighter mission. It brought back memories of sitting with Jean overlooking Haverford West and the Spitfires cutting through the night darkness. It seemed a long time ago. My thoughts with Renee and the decision we both made, directly or indirectly. I knew she would abide by it and still had some doubts and uncertainty about it. What would she have done if we had coupled with which we could have very easily done? I believe that our lives would have been changed for better or worse, and we would never know. I surely would have come back after the war was over. What would happen after that? Our trip to the front continued the next morning by 6x6 truck convoys. The long, cold drive took us past battered cities of Aachen and through the ruins and towns wrecked by the First Army as it smashed its way toward the Rhine. By now we were close enough to the front